Good morning, Peter. And saw your post the other day that you have a book project, but I guess we'll rewind before that. You guys did a somewhat big move. Was a month or two ago? Is that right?
We did. We did do about a month or two ago. We made a big move. So we took advantage of a bunch of different market factors put together. The housing market was still quite rocking in the fall. My husband has a business that is primarily in the West Coast, and that you don't have to work in an office anymore. So and quite honestly, we also moved a little bit to a state that we thought would be more accustomed to the lifestyle that my husband and I have. So put all those factors together, and we moved from Georgia to California, California desert.
How's that been going so far?
It's wonderful. And it's weird in a way. It's like I cheated winter. I think that's the big thing right now. That we moved here, and obviously it's a little bit colder just for the weather. But when you finish your work day at 2-3 p.m. and it's still sunshine and there are palm trees and there's a mountain, and again the warm weather to wear shorts, like you sort of forget what's going on in the other parts of the country from a weather perspective. And again, we moved to a population that's an area that's very LGBT friendly, of course. And so all of those put together is sort of like a little bit of a fantasy. Like we still do our day to day, we go shopping, we have dinner, but it's also like I've been transported somewhere else.
But not quite being at Disney World. Not quite that extreme.
No, not quite as Disney World, yeah.
Fair enough. And so was the book project something that came up before or after the move?
It came up before. It actually was a little bit of a pandemic project. And I, for your audience, I'm in my 50s. I've been married to my husband for 2 years. We've been together for over 5 years. But prior to that, I was married to a woman for 20 years. And I lived a pretty unhappy and rather sad existence for quite a bit. And I somehow had the gumption or had the ability to finally be comfortable with myself and make pretty life-altering decisions. I essentially reinvented myself. And there's no blueprint to come out when you're in your mid-40s. And I just did it. And I had to make new friends. I had to start over with everything from cooking to clothes to relationships to dating to navigating a workplace where I, again, used to be married to a woman, and now I'm dating men. How do you tell people that? How do you introduce that? How this started was essentially a girlfriend of mine recommended or challenged me, what would happen if you put all of your stories, your coming out process, down on paper? And I just sent her an email with 20 bullet points, and amazingly, 20 stories sort of became 20 chapters. And the biggest sort of revelation for me, or interesting part, was that I could start to develop a thread or see common themes between my upbringing, my parents' relationship, what I was repeating with my ex-wife, and more importantly, what was it a part of my history that made me hide who I was for so many years. And I think the fun part was actually sort of becoming a writer. I mean, I don't want to. It became a process. So I essentially put down on paper that I would write 1,000 words a night, and I try to do it for 20 days out of a month. So 1 month I did 20,000 words. 1 month I did the next 20,000 words. The third month I did about 10,000, and more or less that's the crux of the story. So then it became the editing and understanding, what was I trying to achieve? What type of audience was I trying to help? And then hopefully, write something that's compelling.
Gotcha. Hold on a second. So, all the projects that I've ever tried to start with writing and all this, I feel like I'm Sesame Street generation. Now you're a little bit older than me, but I'm wondering, as you went through all of this, learning to write or telling yourself that you're going to write, etc. What was it, a struggle? I mean, was it rough to do all of the background and actually doing all that by chance?
Surprisingly, it wasn't that hard per se. I think what I think to me the balance I always wanted to achieve was telling a story and then also physically what happened, and then also balancing that with my opinion of it, my impression of it, my reaction of it. And again, a lot of the story, it's not necessarily the happiest story. I know there's a happy ending, but I have a lot of crappy things that happened to me, and I'm very honest. The fact that I chose this life, I made these decisions, and I have to not blame myself, but really put the responsibility on myself that I made certain decisions and lived a certain life, and that I, hopefully, again, always sort of filtering it towards, can I help someone else who might be stuck or in a similar situation as mine to really think that you have the power to change. I mean, because that's what, for most of in fact, that's in the foreword of the book, that when I talk about myself, I saw myself as a coward for most of my adult life. I was afraid to come out of the closet. I was afraid to, be different than other people or be different than what was expected of me. So I lived a less than wonderful existence, and in many ways I felt like the sad times and unfortunate things that happened to me, they were my fault. I deserved it because I was a big fat liar. And that, being honest about that assessment of myself, so again, in many ways the book could be very sad during it. That's the part that I wanted to get across, and I hope that the reader will see sort of the before and after effect. I mean, you can see that a lot in the pictures that I used to look like, the clothes I used to wear, and how much I'm happier, better, freer now because I'm just living authentically normal.
And it's a story that a lot of people have had, but it's unique to each person that goes through this journey. And so where did the term glowing up, as I assume, as opposed to growing up, came from?
That is, yes. Young kids do. There is an expression out there called the glow up, and that's sort of a metamorphosis of when you, from the ugly swan, from the ugly cygnet to the beautiful swan, or anything else where someone gets better looking with age. And honestly, I couldn't get any worse looking than I had before. I used to have male pattern baldness. I was a little bit heavier. I didn't wear clothes that complimented me. I didn't wear clothes that were brighter and tighter, anything like that. All of that expression, and not the fact that glow means, color and happiness and smile, all of that was put together. And, you can't get the dad jokes away from me either. I did like the pun of it, too.
What was an example of one of the dad jokes?
Oh, I think, in my acknowledgments in the book, I talk about my sisters. My sisters were very integral when I was first leaving my ex-wife. Because, again, we might get into this later, but I was more or less in an abusive relationship, and I let someone control me because I was so afraid of being outed at the time. And I thanked my sisters, and I said, thanks for setting me straight. Boom, boom. That's another thing.
Yeah, I need to add some sound effects, I suppose, there too. This is reminding me of at my day job, we have I think it's once or twice a month. They're calling it the Pride Parenting Group, and those are some serious meetings. They're only about an hour long, but some of the stories I've heard in some of these meetings, and I can't really go into much detail because we all agree to keep them, but and it's both angles. You have queer parents raising non-queer children. You have queer children with non-queer parents, and it's all over the board. And you can imagine, and it's all over the U.S. You have, and we'll get into some of these differences between the regions of this huge U.S. that we live in. But it's just taken differently depending on, where you live, and so on. When did you move to the Atlanta area? It was from the Boston area, right?
I moved to Atlanta in 2006. And, I didn't mention this earlier. So I lived there 16 years. And part of the move that I made again to California was also about closing that chapter. Because half my time in Georgia, I was still living that lie. And then half I was finally, being the man I was meant to be. So some great memories, but then also there is some, baggage there.
I can imagine. And, plopping yourself into, but actually, your other half out there, you probably not necessarily dropping into a brand new city. Obviously, you've visited there and you've got other friends, but it's quite a different, Atlanta's a big city, and we have our queer, community here, but it's a little bit different queer community all the times that I've been out west.
Well, my Atlanta existence, so I lived up in Cumming back when I was in my first marriage. So I lived in a very homogeneous place that was far from the city. I mean, physically or mentally far from the city. Also didn't have any gay friends. So moving closer to the city and then creating a friend network that way, it was it was like 20 miles and 20 years apart in some ways.
It is. I mean, even within just a metro area, it can definitely be like that. So the book, is it finished? Is it published?
It is finished. It's not published. So I this copy that I shared, it's a author copy. I just have to do some minor edits. In the first draft of it, I forgot to put the page numbers, little things like that. So I'll be pressing the button on it next week. It'll be available on Amazon and paperback and Kindle.
Gotcha.
And then soon after that, I'll work on an audio version of it. I'll record myself reading it.
Yeah, I was going to wonder if, because again, like I said, I'm the Sesame Street generation. It's a task for me to actually sit down and absorb something by reading. But no, I definitely look forward to it and what it's going to bring there. Looking back, I mean, you've obviously got some finishing touches to put on it, but looking back on, the project, writing the book and everything, is there something was there a pro or a con or anything in the middle through that whole, project there?
There was a funny pro. And of all my reflection, of all the years I've had therapy, I've never put something together that I didn't realize until writing the book. So I have a particularly toxic relationship with my ex-wife. There's no happy ending there, but she has really, more or less, turned my children away from me. It's very unfortunate that we have there's nothing great there right now. And it's always sort of been that way, in which she had the power I gave her the power when we were in a relationship, and then it has never improved per se after I came out. And I've known that. I've always felt like my coming out process was about becoming a whole person, having a community, making friends, finding love again. But unfortunately, it cost me the children, for lack of a better word. And, the children are still young. They're in their early 20s, and I hope things will change. I'm ready for things to change. I'm ready for them to, know the other part of their parents. But again, that's a decision I know that I've made that's been played out for the past 5, 6, 7 years. So I knew that. And I grew up a mama's boy, and I was very much, my mother favored me, my father did not, and my parents chose sides in general. My mother did the same thing with her children to her husband. And I didn't put two to two together that I have loved and idolized my mother and not been the biggest fan of my ex-wife, but they did the exact same thing. And I think that was the biggest aha that I came out, that I knew that my parents did not have a happy relationship, and they did use the children as pawns, but I didn't realize how much I gave my mother a free pass until writing the story.
Mm. And I've seen it play over, unfortunately, over time, where I don't know that offspring learn lessons from their upbringing. I've seen that play over numerous times, and it's unfortunate, but I don't know how you fix it. I guess you try to learn from it and see where you can move on from it is about the best. I'm certainly not any professional. I don't try to be with the mental health field there, but yeah, it's unfortunate. I've seen that play out similarly several times. Let's see, what else about the book? Is there any particular, I know we talked about the 20 chapters and the 20 different topics there, but is there one in particular that that comes to mind that you would like to share?
There's two if we have enough time, but I'll get to the first one. So as your household knows, I'm a big Boston sports fan. And there are two chapters on two different sports teams. I know you're probably going to edit this part out.
Nah.
But one of them is the 2004 Red Sox. And how that was a watershed moment in the Boston sports fans' lives. And it's a touchstone moment. You can say, hey, where were you when the Sox finally beat the Yankees? Or where were you when they, what was it like? But that story has a couple of different layers for me. So my father was born in 1925 and died in 2003. So in Red Sox lore, they won the World Series in 1918 and didn't win again until 2004. So again, not in his lifetime. My father also gave up on baseball in the strike years, I think 94, 96 or something like that. So he would call them the bums. And living out the Red Sox finally beating the Yankees, I reflected on my relationship, because we always lost to the Yankees. And I reflected on that my father lived a life in which he worked 2 jobs for a good portion of my childhood and wasn't really appreciated at home. His wife sort of plotted the children against him. He wasn't in an unhappy relationship, but I never knew who he was. I wanted to celebrate this moment with him, but I was never his favorite, and he wasn't alive. And I wanted to tell him that I finally came out of the closet and that I was happy and that I had gotten out of the bad relationships. And all of that is wrapped up into the Red Sox finally won, and we did it together. And I think it's probably not going to work for a lot of people in terms of, I don't want to read the sports, or I don't want a Boston team. But for me, that I was able to write something that had a couple of different layers to it, I felt pretty good.
Yeah, for sure. The only thing similar to that I can think of is when I moved to Cobb County. So I think most folks listening would know where that is, but it's basically northwest Metro Atlanta. It was ruby red. This was in 2003. And then we recently left Cobb County, moved to DeKalb. DeKalb and Fulton are pretty much the bluest counties in Georgia, but I kind of check off a box. It's like when I left Cobb County in 2021, I left it pretty blue. Now, there are a lot of people that would disagree with that, but if you look at Cobb County politics and the changes, and pretty quick changes over those number of years. So not quite sports related, other than they have the Braves over there now, and that was not quite a popular thing for a number of people. But yeah, it was nice to see that transition. You mentioned a second one too. What was it?
The first chapter is one of my favorites. Well, actually, I have a couple, even if I think about it. The first chapter is really I wanted to start the story with a bang. So the story is not chronological, but the first chapter is essentially the day I left my ex-wife and I started my journey. I was on a business trip. I came home. My head was shaved. All I said was, that's it. And I walked out the door, maybe a little bit, ran out of the door. I got into my car. She got around to the passenger side, sort of banged on the window and said, "Peter, where are you going?" I said, "I'm leaving." And the last thing she said to me was, "I'm going to tell your boss."
Your boss?
Yes, she was going to out me to my boss, essentially.
What an
you
odd
have to think
thing
about
to...
And I said, "Okay," and I just drove away. And as I was driving away, she says, "I'm going to report this car as stolen," which I thought was also kind of funny. But I drove to work. I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't really have a plan. I drove to my work and I went to the fitness center to take a shower. And I ran into my HR guy, Jason. And he looked at me and he said, "Peter, you shaved your head. Peter, it looks like you've lost weight. Peter, are you okay?" And this was the first time I'd ever said this out loud to somebody at work or anybody in Georgia. And I said, "Jason, I just left my wife and I'm gay." And he said the next thing that I didn't even see coming. He says, "It's okay, Peter, I'm gay too." And I was like I totally didn't see that coming. Like my gaydar was so hampered that I couldn't see that at all now. And he was a little bit of an angel. He's the HR guy, and I saw him once a week for maybe about 2 or 3 months because I told you I didn't have any friends. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know the rules about being gay. Not that there are rules per se, but like I didn't know anything.
Well, there's no template for this. I mean, you can't go to the library and find a checklist of here's what to do. Yeah.
So the whole and I think part of my illness, let's call it, that I had made being gay into such a horrible thing, and that I was attracted to bigger, hairier guys, bears. That I was some type of deviant. I think overall, I thought gay people were so different than straight people. What you see in the media, again, not having any friends, and more or less, they're people who just have a different, orientation, of course. But I think that overall, the normalizing of gay people was a lot about my finding my tribe and finding people that were like me or that had similarities or things that I liked. That was the whole process of discovery. There's a whole, and again, in reinventing myself or finding out what I like. I told you before about clothes, about food. Touch is my language of love. I love to be held. I love touch. I love holding hands. And when you live 44 or 45 years and you don't know that about yourself and you finally discover it, it's pretty amazing that how much I was alive all of a sudden.
Yeah, for sure. And it's and I think it's a thing to note that this is turning out pretty well. That there are a lot of other storylines in our community that unfortunately we can't say are quite the same. So it looks like it's still a progress, from what I'm hearing, and it has a nice, that things are getting better. But there's still some things that I think you're working out, and you're here to talk about it for sure. Does the book, speaking of, from chapter 1 that we already talked about, is there any ending to the book? Does it kind of follow chronologically?
It does after a while. There is some touch points again that I want to talk about. When my son was young, he was sick, and then the divorce. My ex-wife sued me 3 months after we got divorced. That's also in the story. How I met my now husband. He liked that chapter the best. I think it's the second to last chapter. Let me read the title. He's going to love this, of course. Building a life with the bear of my dreams. But
so does it have a logo? Is it like a Build-A-Bear logo? So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think there is a little bit of chronological because it also covers the work part. What was my work history? What was it like to come out at a workplace? How I sort of went from being someone who didn't speak at all about my relationship, was sort of embarrassed about my life in general, to becoming the Pride spokesperson for my workplace. I'm on my corporate website right now under diversity. So that sort of evolution, or the role that I play at my work, and the fact that I'm out and proud now. In fact, I'm going to my company's national sales meeting in 2 weeks in Jacksonville. 400, 500 people or so. I am the only person with the same-sex spouse that we know of. And so in many ways, I'm an example of the LGBT community. It's not necessarily very large, but I'm willing to play that role, or willing to be that face for the organization.
Yeah. And you and I have been to, a couple of Out and Equal sessions over, what's the word they call it? It's not workshop. What is the session called every year for Out and Equal?
Out and Equal Workplace something.
Summit.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yes.
Workplace Summit.
So these stories that are told and and shared and mulled over, they're quite interesting for sure. So we'll be definitely on the lookout for glowing up gray. What did I say? Glowing up gray. That's not right. Glowing up gay.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned earlier, it'll be available on Amazon, Kindle, and audiobook to be published there.
And of course, one of the things I'll be doing also is, I've never considered myself a writer, although I'm just putting together a book for the first time. I've never marketed myself this way also. So what does that launch strategy look like? I mean, I'm reaching out to friends. I want them to buy the book. I'd love an Amazon review from them, et cetera, et cetera. But what I hope, or what the plan is right now, is that I'll actually reach out to diversity and inclusion executives through LinkedIn and grow that network and that identity separate than my workplace one, as a way to hopefully share my story with a broader audience.
Yeah. And also the other authors, I think I've mentioned this to pretty much all the other authors I've spoken to, don't forget your local libraries. You can bring a copy of your book to for anyone to check out and keep that traffic going through the local libraries. I think a lot of people forget about the funds and the efforts that go into those. So I would recommend that if you want to consider it.
Local libraries get a shout out in my book, actually, because when I lived a rather lonely existence, I used to frequent libraries in every place I've lived, including Atlanta, to check out CDs. That was a big part of my life, that finding music, curating it, living in that music zone, because I wasn't living in the outside world. That was a big part of my identity for a while.
Yeah. Which actually, when this gets published out on Spotify, it does let me add a song or two. We don't have to answer it now, but we should add a theme song for this episode. So
Yeah.
So let me know on that.
I'll come up with something clever.
Yeah. So we do have a little more time. You guys have been out in California how long now?
About 6-8 weeks.
Gotcha. So any quick differences that you've noticed between Metro Atlanta and California as far as politics? It doesn't necessarily have to be politics, though. Just, what does it look like, your weekends, your evenings out, and things like that so far?
So in no particular order, one of my neighbors is in the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. And I, in one of the towns near Palm Springs, they conduct drag bingo. There's a lot of drag performers. There's a lot of bingo. There's a lot of things happening every day, every week, every weekend. What I found, one of the more interesting local radio station, 106.5, Hey Gay, literally the call letters and how much they speak to the LGBTQ plus community here. And, advertisers that go on it want to make sure that they announce themselves that way and that they are the voice of the overall activities going on. It was a pretty good year from that perspective. So I was in Atlanta for October for Pride, and then I was in Palm Springs in November for Pride. So again, part of my baby gay status, I love going to Pride festivals. I love the overall amount of happiness. And, people that are much younger than us are very much comfortable with putting their flying their freak flag. And that ability to be so comfortable and so out that way in ways that I still haven't achieved or maybe never might be willing to go, or maybe I'm just out of the generation. But I think that is part of what's interesting here. There's definitely a gay bar scene in Palm Springs. And what I find is that in Atlanta, when I was in Atlanta, whether I was at the supermarket, whether we were at a store, my husband and I we'd walk around and we would be together. I mean, it would be no different. You see two guys but it wasn't, it wasn't demonstrative. So I went to my local supermarket yesterday and bought a pound of roast beef. And I said, my husband likes it really red. And the idea that I can drop the word husband at the supermarket at the deli counter and it's normal, it's okay, it's accepted, it's part of the language here. And that the code switching or not knowing who they write it, and again, I'm not saying everywhere is perfect. There are places you can feel comfortable in Atlanta, in Washington, D.C., in Chicago, etc. What I'm saying is that there's almost a community here, multiple towns, almost all the businesses, where I feel much more comfortable that way than I ever did in Atlanta.
Yeah, that's fair. And, even here in Metro Atlanta, you have Atlanta and the rest of Georgia. And it's still even quite different in those two locales. And the hate that is still being spun by, the conservative politicians is just insane. I actually went to lunch recently with Steph Kuntz, who is on the Doraville City Council, and we repeated that the same thing again, that she could not understand how people just pass this judgment, and it's insane. This recently, I through the news side of the business here, there was a story that came out of Finland, and one of the number one things that this particular, he was a psychiatrist over in Finland, mentioned is they do not compare themselves to their neighbors, and Finland usually rates at the top of happiness. around the world. There's so many other things that we should be worrying about than some of these politically spun issues, or nobody cared about them until a politician started talking about
or
them.
until they were invented, to your point. Yes. Well,
I don't know where
I'm not a big fan of the attacks that come on, and that normally it is female-dominated workplaces where you can invent something. So first it was schools, indoctrination with CRT, and now it looks like it's going to be libraries. So going after librarians as a potential hotspot for groomers, or whatever thing you want to say is, if you feel like you have to feel more powerful, by going after women, normally lower paid jobs, as a way to feel superior, or that you're protecting the children, that's a coward.
Yeah, and the kids are all right. I don't know if you've heard of Hard Knocks. It comes on HBO, and they usually follow one or two NFL football teams. But his last name is McBride. I think it's Trey McBride that plays for the Cardinals. They actually did a whole episode about his queer moms, and he's just fine. He's in the NFL. He's got a good head on his shoulders. It's going to be fine. Stop freaking out. Become comfortable with being uncomfortable, and it's going to be fine. We guarantee. So.
Well, I do love that. I do love how much he can obviously provide an example of that. And I think, I kind of want to go back to what you said about Finland, and that deal with your own shit and you take care of yourself at home, and that'll be a greater sense of happiness rather than either finding someone to hate, finding someone to blame, finding an issue that you think is important. And again, take care of your home base first.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, to wrap this up, any other topics, or it's an open book here? Any other topics you want to get in on the episode?
Well, I think I'd like to, talk to your audience a little bit about how they think. Have you spoken to your audience much about a sort of an assessment of the midterm elections and what you think might happen over the next 2 years relative to gridlock or potential other issues in Washington, and how we might prevail?
It's going to be a shit show, honestly, for the next 2 years, and there's no way, in and out about it. The most recent thing, if you go look at it from the financial, Republicans always are freaking out about finances, taxes, et cetera, that they want to set a national 23% sales tax and allegedly get rid of all income taxes. And note that businesses are not going to pay this 23% sales tax they're proposing. Okay, I'll be the first to agree. Even last year, it was the most complex income tax return I've ever filed in my life. But it's a beast. It's not fun. Nobody looks forward to tax time. I get it. But replacing it with just throwing all the babies out with the bathwater there, and now we've got this potential 23%. In addition to, I believe every state is going to have their own, sales tax on top of that. I don't know how that's any better, unless you've heard anything about this.
It's a consumption tax, essentially, right?
Yeah, allegedly. And so, which I think some people on social media have drawn that comparison, that it is a consumption tax and not a VAT. In a number of, countries, the UK, most of Europe. Someone recently mentioned the Cayman Islands as well. They have a VAT. It's not being labeled as that. And, maybe that's political, meandering and what they're doing with it. But I don't see that it's any better. I've not seen the strong, but also that there is the angle of it that it's, if everybody is taxed at 23%, that means folks that are not as well off as us, they're going to have that immediate, that they actually get a break today with the way the income tax structure works. How is it fair for people that are already, down, they don't have as much income? Well, why is that fair that you're going to just immediately jump their, tax, bill? Yeah. As far as the other, what I fear about that, every time you see a news headline, it's one sentence or two sentences at the most. And clickbait, and what is this article actually going through? What I worry with, and I've discussed this with other episodes in the past, John Q. Public here in the U.S., critical thinking is hard, and for someone to literally sit down and, even if they read the article, to fully understand the impact of something like a tax change, or how the impasse in Congress, we're going to head up to another debt ceiling conversation that's coming up, and then the potential that there's going to be a tax on Social Security and Medicare for folks even older than us. A number of my friends have responded that, well, this is what they voted for. And maybe you have to learn lessons. I don't know how this plays out, but the next 2 years, and it's going to have a huge impact on how the political parties spend the next presidential election, because like it or not, people don't like to show up unless there's a president being elected. So we'll see. It's going to be no shortage of pundits from either side, but we'll see how it turns out. I wish I had a magic ball.
Yeah, it was nice not to hear the name Hunter Biden over the past year or so, or at least not that often, and how much that is going to be the face of Washington, or another part of his body, of Washington, probably for the next, or at least from that one side of the aisle, just screaming about that, trying to make that into something.
Yeah. My Dixie Dems episode, I believe, comes up this week. I'm not sure if you have heard of it. A gentleman in South Carolina, a gentleman in North Carolina. One of them is also a Yankee, by the way. He moved down to the Carolinas. But we do something we call the Dixie Dems pretty much monthly. And we dig into these kind of things. And I don't know where this leads. It was also all of this stuff with them trying to find a Speaker of the House. What was it, 20 votes later? I lost count. But the irony that their dear leader, the guy that lives in Florida, was calling around to them and has that much influence and was able to sway the votes. These Congress people, that they don't, why does that guy in Florida have any influence on them anymore? And of all people, Marjorie Taylor Greene actually getting on board and becoming part of the swamp. I actually tweeted at her and said, are you liking that swamp water, honey? Because you become part of the swamp. And of course, it's not going to make any difference, and her followers are just going to shrug and move on and start griping about Hunter Biden and whatever else they can find. It also will be refreshing. Hakeem Jeffries, they have nothing on him. I mean, you never hear his name. All we've heard over the past, decade was Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton. So they've got to recreate a whole other narrative against, a brand new guy there, while they continue to attack all the others. So we'll see. I have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, female Democratic politicians are easy and welcome targets for the right, only because it feeds into this whole, being Democrat is evil, or, that these people are othering. I guess othering is sort of that. One of my favorite recipients of that is Pete Buttigieg going on Fox News. I mean, do you not get a thrill like I do when he schools somebody, when they try to get him either a got you or try to paint his his relationship with his husband or the things that they do as wrong or immoral, and he is just slapped back with facts. It's pretty satisfying.
Yep. And yeah, agreed. There was he was on talking about something about electric vehicles, and there was a question about emissions from electric vehicles, and he's like, it's an electric vehicle, it has no tailpipe. And when you
I think it was, are you going to put gas stations out of business and hurt jobs? That's what it was. Something like that.
It goes back to what I talked about. John Q. Public in the U.S. It is scary at times how insane John Q. Public here in the U.S. Can act, and the comments and the reactions. It's just scary.
My next door neighbor is a 70-year-old woman, and who is conservative, and we obviously learned to not talk about certain things.
Don't upset the nursing home, yeah.
Well, yeah. We found interesting was we lived 10 feet away from each other. I mean, I'm looking at her driveway right now. She rolls down her like metal, like in New York City, like a bodega has like that rolling door. She has those on her windows, and not bars, but like essentially she's trapped up like a cell at night because she's afraid. And again, we live in the same neighborhood. The whole like you should be afraid all the time. The cortisol that must run through her body, that amped up because she's got OAN on her at her house. To me, I thought that sort of adrenaline, or that you're feeling all the time, that must be so weird. And I just can't believe that you are scared or someone's telling you to be scared all the time.
Yeah, and this is from a demographic that actually survived COVID. There was a news story that came out recently. I don't know if it was quite 2 times, but conservative-leaning people were almost twice as likely to die from COVID because of all of these conspiracy theories and not believing in science. But she survived. You should actually tell her that. It's like, at least you survived COVID.
Well, that actually happened.
Congratulations.
Something related to that happened. So a friend of ours is a singer, like a gay man's chorus, and we went. My husband and her went to a performance, and this was again about 6 months ago. He came ahead, and she was asked to wear a mask in the audience. Everyone was masked up, and she refused. And my husband was obviously just embarrassed, but the whole everyone else in the theater is masked up, and that either because you don't believe in it or because you can claim that masks you have trouble breathing. She was escorted out of the theater, and she didn't care.
Yeah, and that's a prime difference, being in California versus these other locales, and I don't know, it's just a very different and being cocky and being only caring about yourself and not it's really disturbing that we still have to deal with this kind of stuff.
Well, and again, not believing in science, of course, it's selective science. If she needs a knee replacement, go into the doctor. She's going to get well that way, but it's not related to this particular thing, or whatever somebody tells you the next thing is. I'm just not going to believe in it. I'm going to do my own research. Oh my God, the word "I'm going to do my research" drives me crazy, only because it's a cover for I have my belief and I'm going to find information that justifies or agrees with what I already believe.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it's rampant. You see way too much of it. I don't know. All right. Well, let's wrap this up. Anything else you wanted to wrap up with here?
I just wanted to say thanks for the opportunity. This is, again, because my book hasn't been published, this is the first time I've ever spoken about it. And you made it very comfortable, very easy, very fun. So thank you.
Yeah, and we'll have to pick out a song or two. But let me know over Messenger. We'll get it published out. And yeah, thanks for taking the time out.
It's got to be "I'm Coming Out" by Diana Ross. I mean, is there any other choice?
That'll work. We'll have to find if there. Of course, we know Diana Ross, but we'll have to find if there is like a cover that's been done of it that's been fun. So, but not necessarily. Yeah, that works. All right. Well, have a good week. Recording this on MLK Day. Hopefully, everybody remembers why we're doing MLK Day today. And have a good week. And
it's a day of service.
And best of luck to you guys out there, and stay cool.
I'll do my best.
In the desert, yeah. So, all right. Have a good week. Chat with you guys later.
You too. Thanks again.